Good afternoon, class. This is Unit 8, Section 3, and the title of this section is A New Plan of Government. I hope you enjoyed today's vodcast. We're going to be learning about the federal government and how the Constitution set up the powers of the federal government. The roots of the Constitution, we actually took things from other people, different concepts that helped us influence the Constitution's makeup and provided a framework for a strong central government. Remember that the Articles of Confederation was a weak central government. It only had one leg on the stool. Remember, one branch, the legislative branch, that had very limited power. There was no executive or judicial branch or system of courts for the United States at that time. Our government was influenced by ancient Greece and Rome, ancient civilizations that also had representative democracy, or republics, in which people would elect people to go to a particular area or forum to represent them. We were also influenced by European political institutions, British ideas and institutions particularly. We looked at documents like the Magna Carta, and we looked at Parliament, and we looked at the English Bill of Rights, and kind of gathered information from them and kind of incorporated them into our constitutions. We wanted individual rights protected from the government. We were very scared of a super strong central government that would infringe on the rights of the citizens. Some of the influence from the British system of government was the Magna Carta, passed in 1215. This particular document placed limits on the power of the king. The king had to ask permission to spend money from Parliament. Parliament kind of oversaw the king and his power, and it kept the king from getting too powerful. Also, after the glorious revolution of William and Mary, England passed the English Bill of Rights. England wanted individual rights protected from the government and the king. You could not be thrown in jail without a trial. You had to know the charges levied against you. There were no cruel and unusual punishments. These were all rights guaranteed in the English Bill of Rights. And two particular European philosophers, John Locke and Baron Montesquieu. John Locke stated that all men were born with natural rights, life, liberty, and property. This is eerily similar to what Thomas Jefferson said in the Declaration of Independence. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Does this sound familiar? Baron Montesquieu said that the powers of government should be separated and balanced to keep one person from getting too much power, or one branch from getting too much power over another. This is an idea that's directly placed in the Constitution with our system of checks and balances. Federal system of government. The Constitution created a federal system of government. Federalism, one of your vocabulary words for this unit, is the sharing of power between the national and the state governments. That means the national government has, or federal government has, a certain amount of powers, and the state governments have certain powers reserved for it. The federal government has the power to tax everyone in the United States, regulate trade with everywhere in the United States, control the currency that we use, raise an army, and declare war. Basically, the federal government has the right to pass all laws that deal with the functioning of our government. State governments also have power. They can pass and enforce laws within their states. That means the state of Kentucky cannot pass a law and expect people from Indiana to abide by Kentucky state law. They have their own set of laws. They could regulate trade within the state that they live in. They could tax within the state that they live in. Establish schools and universities and other governmental institutions. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land here in the United States. No state can pass a law that goes against the Constitution. Any dispute between the states and the federal government was to be settled in federal court, the Supreme Court. Any disputes between states, that means if Kentucky had a beef with Indiana, it would be settled in the United States Supreme Court. All laws passed by both federal government cannot go against the Constitution, nor can a state law go against the Constitution either. Next, we're going to talk about the organization of our government. Influenced by Montesquieu, the federal government was set up with three parts or three branches: the legislative, executive, and judicial branch. The first three articles, or parts, of the Constitution describes the powers and responsibilities of each branch. These branches had different things or tasks that they are to do for the people of the United States. Article 1 deals with the legislative branch and establishes a Congress or lawmaking branch of government. The Congress is made up of two houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate. In Section 2, we talked about the Great Compromise, and it set up each state's representation in the House of Representatives proportional to its population. The more people you have, the more representatives you have. That means a state like California with such a large population is definitely going to have more representatives in the House of Representatives than the state of Kentucky. The Senate is not set up like that. It's simply set up with 2 senators for each state, for a total of 100 senators, 2 for each of the 50 states. What are some of the powers of Congress laid out in the Constitution? Well, the Congress can collect taxes, print or coin money, regulate trade, declare war, raise and support armies, and pass all laws needed to fulfill the function given to it, stated in the Constitution. If they need to get something done for the government, they can pass a law. Now, of course, the president can veto this law, which is something we'll talk about in the future, but they can pass laws. They are the law-making body of our country. Let's talk about the executive branch. Remember, many people in the United States, our new country, had memories of King George, and this made the delegates reluctant to establish a powerful executive branch, a person that has too much power over the citizens. They didn't want another king. Some say that the Articles of Confederation failed, though, because of the lack of no executive branch. Remember in Section 2, we talked about Shays' Rebellion and how people were scared of rebellions and that there would be anarchy if we didn't have a strong executive to kind of put down rebellion. Article 2 lays out the powers and the responsibilities of the executive branch, headed by the President of the United States. He is the chief of the executive branch. Presidents are elected to serve 4-year terms. And for those of you who might not be familiar, here in November, we are going to elect our new president to serve a 4-year term. Some of the powers of the executive branch, well, first and foremost, the president is the commander-in-chief of all armed services, the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. He is to conduct foreign relations with other countries. He's the one that speaks to diplomats and presidents and prime ministers of other countries to keep good relations, to establish trade, to establish commerce, to keep peace with other countries. Another primary job of the president and the executive branch is to enforce the federal laws passed by Congress. It is his job to maintain order and to enforce the laws that Congress passes. Our third branch is the judicial branch. Article 3 lays out and establishes the judicial branch or court system of the United States. The nation's judicial power resides in the nation's highest court. The highest court in the land is the Supreme Court. The nation also has lower courts, appellate courts, and district courts, but these courts answer to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court and the lower courts hear cases involving the Constitution. Laws passed by Congress must pass muster with the Constitution. That means they cannot pass laws that are against the Constitution, or the Supreme Court will declare them unconstitutional and they cannot become law. It also settles disputes between the federal government and the states and state against state. Those conflicts are all settled in the Supreme Court of the United States. Next, I want to talk about checks and balances. One of the most distinctive features of our government is the separation of powers. That means separating the power of our government into 3 different branches: the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. The power is divided between these 3 branches. To keep one branch from gaining too much power, framers built in this system of checks and balances. Each branch has its jobs and responsibilities. It cannot do or assume the duty of another branch. The Constitution created a citizenship, or created citizens of the United States. It set up a government in which these citizens choose their officials directly or indirectly. This is a republic. This is an example we were talking about earlier about ancient Greece and Rome of a representative democracy. Officials answer to the people rather than to the states. That means the President of the United States is directly answers to the people that elected him. The same as our representatives, our senators, our governors, all the officials we elect represented us answer to us. This government was to protect the rights of the governed. Before the new Constitution could go into effect, 9 of the 13 states needed to ratify or approve it. By late 1787, these state conventions started to meet, except for Rhode Island. They were just opposed to the Constitution form from the beginning. They had a problem with this. The great debate ensued in newspapers and town meetings and ordinary conversations. Supporters of the new constitutions were called Federalists. Federalists enjoyed the support of 2 famous Americans, George Washington and Ben Franklin. 3 of America's brightest political minds backed the Constitution. They were also Federalists: John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison. All these were called Federalists. They were for the Constitution. They were for passing and ratifying the Constitution. These 3 men teamed up to write a set of essays, and they published these essays throughout newspapers throughout the country to encourage the support of the passing of the Constitution. Like I said, these essays were called the Federalist Papers. The group that opposed and did not support the Constitution were called the Anti-Federalists. They were not nearly as organized as the Federalists, but they also wrote essays, but they were written against the Constitution, and they were called the Anti-Federalist Papers. The Anti-Federalists feared a strong government that would take away the personal rights and freedoms of the citizens. Patrick Henry from Virginia said the Constitution is, quote, incompatible with the genius of republicanism. He was just scared that a strong central government would lead to the infringement of personal rights of the citizens of the United States. The strongest criticism of the Constitution was that it did not contain a Bill of Rights to protect the rights of the citizens. Originally, as the document was drafted and put together, it did not contain the Bill of Rights. These arguments boil down to 2 fears. Anti-Federalist fear of the government being too strong and taking away personal rights, and the Federalist saying on the flip side that a weak government would lead to chaos and disorder, such as events like Shays' Rebellion. So there had to be a compromise somewhere. On December 7th, 1787, Delaware became the first state to ratify the Constitution. On June 21st, the 9th state, what they needed, New Hampshire, ratified. Virginia and New York, anti-Federalist leading states, hadn't ratified the Constitution yet. So therefore, a Bill of Rights was promised to these states, and the Constitution became the law of the land in 1790. The Bill of Rights was added to the Constitution. Amendments, which the Bill of Rights contained, were added in 1791.